Earlier today there was a topic put up about plastics and circular economy, and I'll touch on that, but I figured it'd be some of the issues that we're currently facing nationally and internationally, globally. I would like to take a step above some of that and start talking about some of the other key questions for us. And from my perspective, I get these common questions a lot, especially after I've left government. But why aren't things the same? Why are we having difficulties? Why aren't people as happy anymore? And it seems that everything from the climate and economics, social unrest, limits to growth, finite resources, big international companies dominating markets, biodiversity loss, habitat loss, increased pollution, and especially from plastics. They're all kind of infiltrating the day-to-day media, and people are getting overwhelmed. Add to that a loss of direction, and some people say loss of leadership, the cost of living pressures post-COVID, and then someone mentioned to me the other day, spirituality. Where did that go? I'm not talking religion, I'm talking spirituality. And I think there's a lot that we can be doing and should be doing to arrest this kind of inability to cause change and to make things better for the future. Now I'm going to start with some bad news first, and this is the IPCC report from last year. And they identified the usual number of pathways to destruction from the climate change, and about the necessity of us changing what we're doing from a behaviour perspective, but also from an industry perspective and so on. But what's constraining us in a global sense, and this is from a climate change perspective, from their perspective, poverty, inequity and injustice, economic and institutional, social and capacity barriers, siloed responses, and I'll talk more about silos later, lack of finance and barriers to finance and technology. And I actually don't think there's a lack of finance. I think there's a lack of information for financial investors to make good decisions. And then there's trade-offs with the SDGs. And that, I think, means, excuses to keep doing what we're currently doing for as long as we can, because that's what got us here over the last 200 years. And since it mentions SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, here they are. Has everyone heard of what the SDGs? No? Some have, some haven't. And these were introduced in 2015 by the UN, and every country on Earth signed up to them, including Australia. But I cannot find anywhere any report on how we're going in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. But I hasten to add, these goals were produced as what I would consider targets. It didn't dictate how to get there. And so most countries have sat back and pondered and thought and wondered. And so for the past 9-10 years, that's kind of what has been happening in my view. We're not making great inroads on the Sustainable Development Goals, but if you look across them, there's everything from no poverty all the way to peace and justice and strong institutions. And you can just imagine the inertia that's holding all this back, especially if you're in a developing country. But as I said before, I can't find any information or much information about how Australia fares. I can find more about how Japan's going than I can about our country. The World Bank recently released a report which showed waste generation by region from 2016 and predicting out to 2050. And you can see there the red lines graph the huge amount of waste generation that will be growing out to 2050. And a lot of it is in our neighbourhood, so it's South Asia and the East Asia and Pacific. And this isn't being arrested anywhere, so if you look at the Middle East and North Africa, I can imagine that's going to grow astronomically after 2050. And I would also imagine Latin America and the Caribbean is going to head down the same path. So we're looking at a growth industry. But when you consider the amount of material that's gone in to create this waste, it's quite staggering, particularly on a finite Earth. How's it, maybe before I go on, someone mentioned it me before over lunch, you know, what are some of the projects that we could be considering, but if you're looking at international projects, maybe some around waste generation reduction, cleaning up, landfill management, some of the stuff that stops plastics getting into the ocean might be a bad start, particularly in the waste area. And plastics is a huge component. Although I'll show you a graph in a minute which shows that it's not as big as some of the other things we have to face. How's Australia going? We're doing okay, but on the left-hand side shows you the recycling curves from 2010 out to 2022, and on the right-hand side is the amount of material going to landfill. And to break it down for you, C&I is commercial and industrial, so these are waste acronyms, I'm sorry. C&D is construction and demolition, and municipal solid waste is what you put out in your bins at home. That's all the bins. MSW is, so on the left-hand side, that's how much recycling you're contributing to the recycling effort. Most of it's coming from construction and demolition because it's really, really heavy and it's relatively easily dealt with. And the commercial industrial stream, whilst large, is also well looked after. But in the landfill space, municipal solid waste has stayed stagnant from councils and from our households for many years now. And the same with construction and demolition, which is probably a good thing. And the C&I sector has fluctuated a bit in terms of landfill, depends on what's happening at the time. But the important thing, I guess, is that when you look at the recovery rate for our state, we do exceptionally well. We're at 80% plus. South Australia is right there in the middle, it's the highest bar. Australia is around 65%, but you know, we started out in 1993 at about 25%. We're now up to 80 plus. So I think, you know, the work that we've done in the waste and recycling sector in Australia has been really, really good. And that's not just me saying that, that's the EPA and others that have been part of the grand scheme. But all the other states are catching up. And so when you consider we had container deposit legislation in 1977, and then some 46 years later Victoria introduced it and claims it as their own, we know that we've had an impact for those 46 years just on containers, whereas in every other state it's all been going into landfill. And if you remember back in the early days of recycling in Adelaide, we had everything from bags and crates to split bins. Now we've got a common system, it's a 240 litre yellow lidded bin. We've still got a ways to go, but the other states are still grappling with that. And a lot of that is down to local government and their capabilities and willingness to get stuff done. If we look at the recovery rate across the nation, and if you look at the big bars here, building and demolition materials are really, really heavy. And in Australia, we knock over a lot of buildings and we generate a lot of waste. This precinct here generated a huge amount of waste when it was just before construction. A lot of it was contaminated soil. So we have to kind of plan ahead for a lot of the construction and demolition stuff, but we're getting much, much better at it. The other concerns are the red parts. Hazardous wastes, we don't do a great job of that. A lot of it is sent to landfill and it's put into concrete blocks and basically shoved into landfill. The other material is organic waste. In Australia, we still don't have curbside collection for organic waste in most capitals, but we do have it in Adelaide and a lot of regional areas as well. The third red block I'd make your attention is plastics. And plastics is growing at 3% per annum globally in terms of production. But it's also finding its way into the environment, and here this is just the stuff that's going into landfill, but it's equivalent to the amount of paper and cardboard also going into landfill. So we've got some work to do in Australia to improve the recycling capability. So back to South Australia, we had targets for 2023 of municipal solid waste diverted from landfill. At 65%, we achieved 56. The reason why we're at 56 is because we're still not getting full involvement of local government in the organics collection, particularly food waste. So whilst they'll accept it, they don't promote it. And also, we find CNI, or commercial industrial recycling, has gone above the target, and construction and demolition, I noted you before, we hit just over 90%, but it's at 87%. So we're around the mark in those other two categories. But we can do better in municipal recycling. I'm going to jump now, because for 2 years I also chaired the Native Vegetation Council, because I'm an ecologist from background, and the Minister said, I want you to reform the council. No easy task, but globally the biodiversity loss is pretty horrific if you don't know already. In 2010, the threat of extinction were 1 out of 8 birds, 1 out of 4 mammals, 1 out of 4 conifers, pine trees, 1 out of 3 amphibians, and 6 out of 7 marine turtles. 75% of genetic diversity of agricultural crops has been lost. 75% of the world's fisheries are fully or overexploited, and up to 70% of the world's known species risk extinction if the global temperatures rise by more than 3.5 degrees, and we're already at least at 1.5. A third of reef building corals around the world were threatened with extinction. That was 2010. Now, 42,000 species out of 151,000 assessed are considered threatened. So in other words, that number has doubled since 2010. So we have a biodiversity crisis problem. And if I look locally at the native vegetation clearance, this is the cover of native vegetation from about 1840, when we assumed everything was pristine, all the way through to now, 2022 this was, but the data is from 2020. And so the Native Vegetation Act came in 1980, and all of a sudden we halted the amount of clearance. But I can assure you it's still drifting down ever so slow. The other problem with looking at cover is we're not looking at individual species. And the risk here is that we think we've arrested it, but what we don't know is what we don't know. And what we don't know is what's happening to individual rare species or species facing extinction and how they're going. I think it came to highlight on Kangaroo Island post-fire. There was more interest in that aspect, but with reduced funding going into environment each year from government because of our health crisis, this is more and more difficult to get a handle on. So in the State of Environment report, it shows that we think we're doing okay, but we're really not doing okay in terms of knowing about the individual species. But then we have a category for the data, and the data is really, really poor. And we need to be resourcing more and more things like citizen surveys, citizenry science, and so that's another area for investment for Rotary going forward, I reckon, is to improve the number, or get the citizens actually recording data and looking at distribution of species and stuff like that. Now I'm going to move to circular economy. Circular economy is essentially it's a global movement, and it's kind of a new term, but it's really what we've been talking about is sustainability for the last 100 years. But new terminologies bring new vibrancy, if you like, to the discussion from time to time, I find. So sustainability went off the boil a few years, circular economy has replaced it. But it does put it in an economic frame, which makes it more interesting to be able to talk it through with people like developers or treasurers or economists. And many of them still don't agree with it, but be that as it may, Australia is moving in a committed path forward. The EU has already prepared draft legislation and in some instances legislated for a circular economy. India is working down this pathway as well. So is China, and Japan has been at this for quite some time, and regular reports on how it's going. And it's not aligned with certain side of politics or any particular right or left-wing dogma. So it kind of gets away from all of that. And if it's embraced, it actually benefits not only the participants, but also the environment. And it also addresses sovereign risks around materials and materials management, and it also builds resilience in communities. Well, that's the theory anyway. So here in South Australia, my organisation, Green Industries SA, which used to be Zero Waste SA, the idea of the circular economy, so they kind of handle it for South Australia, but more and more of it's happening out of Premier and Cabinet and other departments now, which is positive. The idea is we reduce emissions and keep our existing resources in circulation for as long as possible, while allowing them to retain their highest value. So in other words, we don't downcycle, we upcycle material as much as possible, and therefore balancing our social, environmental and economic needs. But it's also about regenerative practices that improve soil, reduce reliance on chemicals, improve water retention, and reinstating natural systems. So it is a systems approach to our economy and systems thinking, and it links into much, much broader actions. But, you know, I suspect not many people here are across it, and certainly this is part of the reason why we're not making much progress. So why aren't we making progress on all of these fronts? I think primarily it's inertia. There's a lot of sunk cost effects and vested interests. You know the Jevons principle, that if you've already invested in all this infrastructure that's for the last 50 years, you're not about to jettison that to jump to something new. The inability to think and act holistically. So this is the silo mentality. We constantly break stuff down into smaller and smaller components. So if you're doing a PhD at university, you know more and more about less and less until you know absolutely everything about nothing. But it's important we break down some of those silos and we start getting collaboration across. It's not a quick fix, and it's not a quick fix because this is global. This isn't about just fixing it in your backyard. This is about fixing it on an international, global scale. It does require government money, and it requires collaboration and capacity building. And governments don't have the dollars or the right policies yet. We're still working on that within government. So I expect though some of those will come out soon. That's what I'm hearing, but time will tell. Businesses don't have the capability or the investment yet to be able to take leaps of faith. And there's community expectations too. People are consumers. They want others, but they do want others to fix everything for them. So it's not about, for them, it's not so much about what they can do, it's about why isn't the government fixing this? And then we have all the distractions. So everything from the invasion of Gaza to, you know, inequity, poor governance, Russia versus Ukraine, and so it goes. None of that is helping. So the idea is that, you know, we have to translate policy into action, identify real actions to take, and that is we need a strategy. We need to build a scientific evidence base to educate and mitigate against the risks. We need to do tangible, measurable actions, including regulation. And don't be afraid of learning by doing. Doing is part of the process here. It's not analysing and trying to work out the best way and the nirvana of 100 years, but we have no ability to get there because we don't have the technology yet. We need to be working on it, and it's cyclical. And engaging with industry and transforming industry who don't know about circular economy. They're risk averse in uncertain times, so understandably they await others to make, before they make commitments. They can't easily translate profits and margins. They need the demand to push them and to highlight to them that this is the path they need to take. We need lots of case studies. We need extended producer responsibility invoked nationally, and at the moment there's too much voluntarily ascribed, and that means a lot of free riders out there who get away with doing stuff, but there's no, there's nothing to stop them from continuing down that path. And I don't think there's any shortage of investment. It's just that the investors don't know where to put their money. And then there's education and demand creation. You know, public understanding is important here, and the follow through from them to cause the demand for change. But all of this is being worked on, especially lack of regulation and policy at a national level. So I remain hopeful, but I'm impatient. It takes too long. Community demands are global. And this is a learning for me, that they all want robust reporting on carbon and materials. They want less hazardous materials in what they eat and what's produced. We want to be able to repair stuff. Where do I take my TV, which has a line down it, to get repaired? I don't know. It's really difficult. And when I do get it there, is it likely to be able to be repaired? Or is it that the component parts are going to cost more than a new television? Greater care for the environment and biodiversity. Everyone wants that. Everyone wants to know where their food and stuff comes from. They want better labelling and quality of products, but they also want transparency and governance. And in terms of brands, they want to know what the brands stand for. And at the moment, there's a lot of greenwashing going on. And they also prefer to buy quality and buy local. And that's pretty much everywhere that I've read. And governments need to be transparent, provide quality systems, focus on procurement and investment so that we drive the right outcomes. It's not about just getting the cheapest possible that will fit the bill for a period of time until I leave office. This has to be long-term, and it has to be about planning for our future. And if we're not planning for our future now, when will we be? Because at the moment I feel that we're kind of in a lottery. We all sit back and keep, you know, using the fuels and doing the usual things until it's going to have an impact, and then we're going to change. But my concern is that when will be too late. Biodiversity, in terms of governments, whether it's local, state or national, what are you regenerating? What are you planting? What are you putting back? So it's not just about saving what's there. It's about putting back stuff, putting back trees that are suitable for the changing environment and that are going to support a habitat which you can actually feed black cockatoos or whatever it might be. And is your energy renewable? In some states, it's still not, they still don't prefer renewable energy. But the idea here is that all government needs to be working together in unison. It cannot be just local government leading the charge and state government wondering what they're doing. This has to be a unified approach in my book. And for business and industry, the opportunities are around supply chain management. So Scope 3 measurement will be coming in the not too distant future for your greenhouse gas emissions. But if you're not looking at your supply chain and the materials that you're using, the carbon, the fertilizer, the chemical use, you're going to miss the boat. But don't greenwash. There are now severe penalties for the ACCC. I'm hoping they bring someone to court soon. Extended producer responsibility and product stewardship. If you're not doing it, get ready, because it's going to come. It's already largely in place in Europe. They're cranking it up another level. If we want to export to Europe, we're going to have to comply. Servitization rather than sell. So if you've got a huge farm and you have to buy farming equipment, maybe you lease it rather than buying it. Maybe if you're producing or importing that equipment, you want to encourage people to lease rather than buy. Biodiversity and heritage agreements, invest in ESGs, educate your visitors about the brand and what you're doing on all of those above actions. And the other thing is, there is an opportunity for businesses to start working together, particularly in regions and along supply chains, because if they adopt common systems for measurement and for getting stuff done, you reduce the overall cost for everyone. And if we can do that, we get a livable earth, maybe, if you could spell it right. But the missing link for me, and the missing link for, this is the last slide, is the role of communities. And so I started my career mapping the environment, what's out there, how's it at risk, and I've done everything from looking at Kakadu and the Western McDonnell Ranges to all of the coastal parks and the Flinders here. They're actually okay. It's the people pressure that's causing the problem. And globally, when I was born, there was about 2.8 billion, I think it was. We're now hitting 8 billion, and in the next few years we'll be up around the 9 billion mark, and by 2050 we'll be at 10.4 billion. This is not an environmental problem, this is a human problem. And that's why I thought that if you're looking for inspiration, it's about getting the community together around projects and topics that we can exchange information about and exchange experiences to be able to pressure government and to also highlight to industry where the opportunities lie going forward. This is a platform which has been developed out of the USA, but Monica and I are trying to help out with it. It's still in the early stages of development. It's a not-for-profit. It's trying to develop a global ecosystem for virtual community centres, a movement aiming to bring humanity together in an effort to re-establish the health of the Earth's life support system and to ensure a future of well-being for all human and non-human life on Earth. No small kind of vision here, but the important thing, I think, is to enable people to share information and to share knowledge. And at the moment, if you're using some of the other platforms like Facebook and whatever, you're not sure of where the information is coming from or how you verify it and how much of this is a conspiracy theory. So thank you for the opportunity and thanks for the time.
And to say that I thought while I was sitting there that I would like to work with you to get a citizen science project for the Rotary Club of Adelaide that we refine and then go globally. So I thought I would and I have a present for you. Got anything that is in our money that we have collected today will go to one of our charities, but we have had a 100 years centenary, and these are the books written by our local people about them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.